What's good, everybody? What's good, everybody? It's Boxingwave. Welcome back to the channel. Feels good to do a breakdown. Chris Eubank Jr., Conor Benn is going to be this weekend. Finally, all right. It's going to be on dazn. It's going to be a pay-per-view. It's going to be this Saturday coming up, and I will be covering a fight live. All right. It is pay-per-view though. I think it's $24.99 in the U.S. Okay. I believe the card starts around 2 p.m. Eastern, and the ring walkouts is about 5 p.m. Eastern. That would be 10 p.m. out in the UK. All right. Lots to unpack. I have done a breakdown for this fight. I actually checked this morning. I did a breakdown for this fight back in 2022 when it was supposed to happen. Okay, a lot of things have changed since. I can't say my stance on this have changed that much, but I'm definitely going to talk about everything in between when this fight was supposed to happen the first time, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how I felt about the first fight going into that fight. All right. Chris Eubank Jr. is 35 years old now. Okay, he's 34 wins with 25 knockouts with 3 losses. Okay, one loss being against Liam Smith, a recent loss, which was a stoppage loss. This was Liam Smith was the opponent after the Conor Benn fight did not happen. Okay, but he avenged that loss in a rematch by stopping Liam Smith. Went on to beat Meta, and now we're here. So he's been a little bit more active since Conor Benn supposed to the fight that was supposed to happen. And Conor Benn, he's 28 years old, 23 wins with 14 knockouts, no losses, no draws. Okay. And between that time, he had 2 fights, right? After sitting out for a year over the I guess the failed drug test. Okay. Sat out for over a year, returned, had a couple of fights. Roscoe was the first one. Peter Dobson was the second one at 54. And it's been a year since he's been back in the ring. We haven't seen him since early 2024. All right. So where do we get started? Well, let's talk about the conditions of this fight compared to the first one. Now, I believe that this time around, there is a rehydration clause. There was one in the fight when it was supposed to happen before. But there was also a catch weight, I believe, at 157, 158. I'm not sure, but there was a catch weight at a weight that Chris Eubank has never fought as a pro. And now I don't believe there's a catch weight, but there's a rehydration clause. Chris Eubank can't, I think he has to come in the day of the fight at 170. Okay, so I think the same day weigh-in thing, he can't go over 10 pounds. I don't know how he's going to be on the actual fight, but at once that day he has to be at 170. All right. Because Conor Benn tested positive the first fight, and I think this was like days before the fight. I think there was some controversy going into this fight as far as the negotiations of what weight it should be, and stuff like that. And I believe Chris Eubank really wanted to fight at 160, which is fair in my opinion, because if you're going to go up to the weight, not that I don't believe in catch weights or anything like that, but being that this fight was canceled because of Conor Benn's, failed drug test, I think it's fair to change the conditions a little bit, and I think that if Conor Benn is going to go up there and fight Chris Eubank, he should fight out 160. Now you guys agree on what you agree on, but I think it's fair. Just my personal opinion. Plus, Chris Eubank is 35 years old now. He's going to be 36 in September. I think outside of the styles, and all of the things these fighters could do strategically, you have to wonder how the age is going to affect Chris Eubank Jr. You got to wonder how the rehydration clause is going to affect him. You know what I mean? Is he going to be drained for this fight? These are the things that's the handicaps that he has going into this fight. All right. And then with Conor Benn, who hasn't been as active, and he's obviously not as experienced, you got to wonder How's he gonna be at 160 going up? Because he was never a big 147 fighter. You know, when you look at guys like Kell Brook or, an Errol Spence or even like a Jerron Boots Ennis or even like a Virgil Ortiz Jr., these guys are bigger than Conor Benn. Conor Benn is not really a big guy. He was never really a big guy at 47, and plus he's not tall neither. He doesn't have a long reach at that. So you got to wonder how he's going to deal with not only the biggest guy he's ever faced, but the most experienced guy he ever faced. And to me, the most talented guy that he's ever faced, and Chris Eubank Jr. And those are the keys that you got to look at going into this fight, not really knowing what they can really do at these weights and stuff. I know everybody has been talking so much about the weight this and the weight that, Conor Ben being the smaller guy, Chris being the bigger guy, but he's fighting out the rehydration clause, age, all of that stuff. I know we're talking about a lot of that, but I try to prioritize what they can do as far as their technique and stuff. And when I did my breakdown, when they were going to fight originally, I brought up a lot of those key points as far as their styles. Um, the thing is with Chris Eubank, I really don't know what to exactly expect because I've seen him fight so many different ways and I've seen him change his style throughout his career based on who he's trained with. You know, um, I think when it came to technique, I didn't think he had the greatest technique in his earlier years when he fought like Billy Joe Saunders and the fights before that. He clearly was getting outboxed, but he was the aggressor. You know what I mean? And he was just being, he was a true dog. Um, I think he changed his style a little bit, boxed a lot better after that fight. When he lost to George Groves, I just think George Groves was not only the bigger fighter, but he was a better boxer. And even though Chris Eubank boxed well, I just think he didn't have the skills that George Groves have and the experience. You know, but after that, there was a dramatic change in his style when he linked up with Roy Jones Jr. And he started fighting similar to Roy. And I think it worked because he kind of had the athleticism. Obviously, he's not nowhere near on Roy's level, but it kind of worked out for him because of his jab, his left hook, that lead left hook of his. He had a power. He's pretty explosive, and he was able to do certain things that fit well for that Roy Jones Jr. style. Um, but it didn't really work out when he fought Liam Smith. Liam Smith had trapped him against the corner, and he just went off on Chris Eubank while he was in the corner. You have to mention the elbow, because the elbow was a huge factor in that knockout. You cannot mention that. You have to mention that. It didn't really work out for him in that fight, and he was stopped in that fight. But he was able to win the rematch. All right, and again, it's been so many different transformations. Now he's back with Roy, okay, in this fight here, and I just think that overall, I just think with the experience he has and the different ways that he can fight, I think he has so many he has so many tools. He can be the pot shotter and move, and lure you into traps and just work and keep distance and work behind that jab, which he's dropped fighters with, like Liam Williams, knocking them down continuously just from a jab, or and letting guys walk into that check left hook, or he can be a dog and uppercut you to death on the inside, you know, he can do that and just physically overwhelm you by going to the body on the inside and staying in the pocket. I've seen him do so many different things. Um, I don't think he's great or elite at everything, but I think he's so well rounded on how he can fight. Like he can fight any kind of style. you know. Um, and he's always been durable outside of the Liam Smith fight where he was stopped. He's been durable his whole career. I've seen him burn out a little bit, like against the Liam Williams and Liam Williams against Liam Williams in that fight. Um, he did start to slow down and started losing some of those later rounds when Williams picked up the pressure. But for the most part, he's been pretty durable. He's been well conditioned. He's always been good with his fitness and everything. Um, he's well rounded. I know what I'm getting from him, and I know that he can adjust. But Conor Benn is a little bit more mysterious with him, because I've seen him fight the same way every single fight. And we know he's aggressive. He's super explosive, right? He's fast. He's explosive. He has power. He's very intense. But the Conor Benn you get in round one, you're going to get that Conor Benn throughout the fight. The only thing is, as he begins to slow down, he's less effective. And that could be a problem for him in this fight, even though he's a younger guy. Um, it could be a problem for him. Now he hasn't lost to anyone. Um, he did get dropped a couple times in a fight earlier in his career, in a fight that he avenged. But since he started fighting the better fighters, like the Formellas, the Sammy Vargases, the Chris Algieri's, the Adrian Granadoses of the world, and even going up to fight Peter Dobson at 54, um, I still haven't seen him fight a real puncher yet. He has not fought a real puncher. He hasn't fought a fighter that made him respect their power like that. He hasn't had like an opponent where he had to be like really defensively responsible. And he hasn't fought anyone that's made him or forced him fight on the back foot. You know what I mean? He hasn't fought anyone that has pushed him back. He's always coming forward. For the most 90% of the time, he's coming forward. And this could be that fight. This could be that fight. And I think if there's a point in this fight where Chris Eubank is pushing him back, Conor could be in a lot of trouble at that point. Not saying he can't do it, but we haven't seen it. You know what I mean? He's been the dominant fighter every single time. But there has been a difference. And I think at 54, he hasn't looked as destructive. When he fought a Roscoe was just pretty much a puncher bag. Like Conor was just hitting him, looking as strong and as explosive as we've seen him in the past. But in that fight there, when I remember watching it, I was like, man, he was hitting this guy clean, but it didn't really phase Orozco like that, Same with Peter Dobson. I think Peter boxed a little better, but it didn't seem like Conor's power really like phased him. You know what I mean? He seemed, and he said that in an interview. I seen an interview with Peter Dobson. He was basically saying like, listen, I've been in the ring with, all of these top fighters between, maybe Crawford and Jaron Ennis and all these guys. He's like, I didn't think Conor's power was really anything crazy, And I believe him based on the fight and what I saw. But what I saw in the Peter Dobson fight, which was his very last fight, is that Peter, who doesn't really have the speed of a Chris Eubank or even just a raw talent, I saw Dobson counter him and buzz him, and yeah, um, he definitely exploit some of the holes in Conor Benn's game. And I took notice in that, and I don't think Peter is on Chris's level. I don't think he could do half of what Chris can do. And I think that is one thing you have to take notice in. Like when you're moving up to the next weight, these guys are going to be a lot more durable. Not only that, but I happened to watch the Chris Algieri fight, and that was down at 47. And I just think from looking at Conor, going from the Peter Dobson fight, and then going back to the Algieri fight, because sometimes you just got to do that when fighters are moving up in weight. I just noticed that I didn't think Ben was nearly as agile. I think like you going up, that took a little bit away from the speed. You know what I mean? I think it takes away a little bit when you're carrying a heavier weight, the extra pounds, and when you're a really fast fighter, yes, you're still very fast, but you might not be as fast, and you not might not be as sharp defensively. Because now you're fighting at a higher weight, and now you're even fighting at an even higher weight at 160. Not only that, but Conor seemed to be burnt out in the second half of that Peter Dobson fight. You know, um, he wasn't completely gassed, but I noticed that he was a little bit more tired in the second half of the fight. And Peter started to build some momentum. I mean, Conor still clearly won the fight. I don't want to overrate, but Peter did a lot better, I think, than most people expected. Um, I think major flaws with Conor Benn is just really like the defense. I think he's so aggressive and he loves to throw his combinations that his focus is to destroy. That's his nickname, and he just doesn't focus on what's getting thrown. When he's hooking, that free hand is never up. You know what I mean? And he comes straight in. His hands are down. His hands are always down. And I just think that is trouble for a guy like a Chris Eubank, who's a phenomenal hooker with a good jab. Just getting in, because you got to remember, Chris Eubank's 5'11". Conor Benn's about 5'8", 5'8", 5'9", maybe. But there's a major height difference and reach difference between these two. And the thing is with Chris, who has a good jab, just getting past the jab is going to be a tough one for Conor Benn. Just getting past that. And then when you do get past that, you got to worry about the hook, okay? You got to worry about the uppercut. You got to worry about those things on your way in. And that may be a lot because he hasn't really had to deal with that yet. This fight here is leaps and bounds in opposition, like compared to what he's used to. And he hasn't fought a puncher. This is his first puncher he's fighting, in my opinion. Real puncher. And when you look at the Adrian Granados fight, for example, which surprisingly, Granados, who's been in some wars up to that point, he didn't fight that way. He used the ring the entire fight. He did not engage with Conor Benn, and none of us expected it. Neither did Conor. I think it's similar to Jaron Ennis against Shukajan, Karen, the first fight, where the guy just totally didn't engage, and Conor really didn't know what to do. But when you look at that fight, you know exactly, just keep slipping to your left, circling to your left, slipping in that overhand right. Conor just couldn't land with it. And Adrian didn't really counter, didn't really engage, like I said, but Chris will. And then Chris is going to keep you on the end of that jab. I think with Chris, though, I think one of the issues with Chris sometimes is, the way he exits. He's always, not always, but a lot of the time, he's going straight back and he's leaning back. And if Conor could find a way, to come in, shoot that jab, shoot the backhand, right hand, straight right hand, but follow it up with that swivel jab, if he can throw that combination and catch Chris maybe off balance while he's leaning back, you might catch him with a shot and get him with a surprise knockdown, or you could hurt him. But the straight right hand, it won't be as easy to find Chris Eubank like he did with Algieri, who was on the ropes at the time. It was a great shot. Nice jab feint, straight right down the middle. Perfect. Right on the chin. Drop Chris Algieri. But Chris Eubank rarely puts himself in that corner like that, especially for a guy that he already knows is going to be very aggressive. A guy that is shorter, doesn't have the reach. He's going to be moving and he's going to be working the jab, you know. Um, Very difficult fight. I think the fight is going to start out with Eubank using the ring, moving laterally, using jab, you know. Will counter with the left hook in opportunities. So in certain opportunities where Chris might be on the inside and they might be on the pocket, you know, Chris might just throw the uppercut. But I don't think he's going to be throwing combinations early. Chris Eubank is a combination puncher too, but Conor Benn, that would be his strength in this fight, or it could be his weakness if he doesn't have his hands up. But Conor Benn early on is going to be looking to try to counter Chris Eubank's jab with that overhand right, getting in, using that jab to get in, but the jab won't be really as effective. The jab is just going to be trying to get in range. Chris is going to keep moving. So Conor Benn is going to have to find a way to kind of cut him off and trap him, you know? Um, Problem is Conor Benn is going to be lunging in a lot. Chris doesn't really have to in this fight. Conor Benn is going to be overextended, might leave opportunities for Chris Eubank to catch him on his way in. But I think that's how the early rounds are going to go. Um, as far as when things, you know, once we get past 5 rounds or so, depending on how it goes at this point, Chris, depending on how, again, there is a rehydration clause. He is 35 years old. If he's still in very good condition, he might start to press the action coming forward. And if this fight, at that point, I favor him in the pocket with Conor Benn, especially with those uppercuts. Go to the Arthur Abraham fight. You know, go to the Billy Joe Saunders fight when he burnt out. If you go to those fights, that's the Chris Eubank Jr. that might show up in those later rounds. Overall, I think Chris Eubank Jr. has most of the advantages here in this fight. He has the size, he has the experience. Even at this stage, I think he even has the power. I think he has the better tools. Unless we see something different from Conor Benn in this fight, I have to go with Chris Eubank. You know, and I think it's a possibility that he will stop him. I think both of them are motivated for this fight. You know, I think you know, I didn't talk about a lot of things. I didn't talk about the build up in the fight. I didn't talk about a lot of stuff. You know, I did see Chris Eubank Sr., you know, interview. I did watch it. It did make me kind of sad. It did bother me to hear him talk about his son the way he did and about this fight. You know, but you know, he's been through a lot, you know, losing his one of his sons a few years back. Um, you know, he doesn't like the catch weights and or the rehydration clauses. He doesn't like the whole thing, you know. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about how he feels. I mean, as a father, I mean, I wouldn't know. But it's kind of sad to hear him say some of the things he said. With all that being said, though, I think Chris Eubank has most of the advantages here. And I think Conor Benn, as explosive, as powerful as he's appeared to be, there's a lot of people that he has not knocked out that he's fought, you know, and Chris Eubank has a way better KO ratio compared to Conor Benn. I don't think people really look at that. You know what I mean? Um, so I got Chris Eubank winning this one. I think he stops Conor Benn in the second half of this fight at some point. You know, I think he's just going to be too big, too strong, too experienced. And I think if he has a good game plan, he should get the job done. I think Conor has to be perfect to win this fight. And I think Chris would have to obviously not be at his best physical condition. And I think that's part of the reason why the rehydration clause is there and why originally there was a catch weight. All right. I don't believe there's a catch weight for this one. But I have Chris Eubank Jr. winning the fight. I just got to go with the guy that has more tools, more experience, more power. All right. Um. Anyway, that's my breakdown. Please subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys on Saturday. Peace.